Welcome, atheists, agnostics, skeptics, freethinkers, whatever you like to call yourself. You are welcome here. At Seattle Atheist Church, we call ourselves an atheist church because you will never hear anything supernatural promoted at the podium. And before we get started with our talk this morning, I have 4 quick announcements. So the first announcement is that we did have our Women's Home Circle last Friday. It was really nice. So I want to invite everyone to come to that. We have our Secular Saturday Social that's going to be taking place at Brower's Pub in Fremont on Saturday, August 27th at 2 p.m. And it should be really nice. We usually sit outside. About 8 people show up or so. We'll be sitting outside, drinking beer and talking. And if you are interested in that, please RSVP, because I've heard from some people that if people don't RSVP, they don't know who's coming. They don't know that people are coming, and then they might be hesitant to come. Third thing is we have space for about 7 more talks until the rest of the year. So the way we do it here is that people in our community are invited to give talks. So if you have a talk in you, we have space for 7 more. Just please let me know if you'd like to give a talk. And finally, I want to say thank you to the people who went to seattleatheist.church and made a donation. Those donations are what kind of make the whole thing possible. So thank you for those of you who are doing that. And for anyone who is not in a position to be able to do that, we want you to know you are absolutely welcome here regardless, okay? Your gift is your presence. So we have Nate is going to give us a talk on drug addiction and homelessness. Yes? Welcome, Nate.
Hi guys, so my name's Nate, and my talk is going to be kind of on addiction, what is addiction, and then kind of are addicts really all that different from us? And so I think first I want to tell you a story about Eric. Eric was my best friend growing up. We went to the same schools together, K through 12 schools. Every day I'd wait for him after class. We'd walk home together. We traded Pokemon cards and Yu-Gi-Oh cards, and we'd spend the night at each other's houses every weekend playing pool and watching cartoons. And I remember, once we got to middle school, we discovered the internet and became internet dwellers. I was definitely a 90s kid. And we'd play StarCraft and play Halo, and basically we were inseparable all the time. As we got older, I think we were in 7th grade, our parents took us to our first music concert. We saw the Cars, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. That was previous to my generation, but we had so much fun seeing them on stage and all the energy, and we thought, man, we got to start our own band. And so Eric picked up guitar and I picked up bass guitar, and we started playing together, and I remember we had our first concert at the end of 7th grade, and we played for his Boy Scout troop rally. There must have been 50 people out there, and we sucked horribly. We were messy and uncoordinated and anxious and had no idea what we were doing. We'd never been on a stage before, but we had so much fun together. And high school came, and we discovered poetry together to use in our music. Then we could start writing songs and playing, and we'd write about our first crushes and relationships and friends and emotions and everything that comes to mind when your hormones are out of whack and you're 14 and 15. And, as we got older, hormones really got the best of us, and some of those writings went kind of dark, and we started writing about pain and hurt and death and all kinds of dark things you think about when you're 15 and going through your first bout of depression. And during this time, my home life kind of started to take a dark turn. My parents went through a pretty nasty divorce, and his actually got a lot worse. His parents started drinking a lot, and as he became more and more of a difficult teenager to raise, his parents would drink more and more, which created a further disconnect between him and his family and his community. And it wasn't long after that Eric started using heroin, and kind of at that point, it wasn't long after that Eric and I stopped being friends. I couldn't have that in my life with what I was going through and what he was going through, and we kind of lost touch. and a lot of the details from that time are kind of fuzzy and difficult to recall, so I'll kind of spare you from it. But I looked him up not too long ago, and he's actually been able to turn his life around. He's married now, he's got a kid he's raising, and he's been able to find a sense of community and, a place in his life where he feels valued and can do something. And so he's not, just because he touched this drug one time, he's not on the street and no longer a functioning member of society that just steals and lies and cheats all the time. A lot of the stereotypes that we have about addicts and heroin addicts in particular. And so I think kind of the reason I'm up here today, and I wanted to talk about this, is because I think we need to do something as a society to change some of the stigma that we give towards addicts and towards drug addicts in particular. And I recently saw a TED Talk by Johann Hari titled "Everything You Know About Addiction Is Wrong." Has anyone seen that TED Talk by any chance, or heard of it? Jack has. Cool. So he talks in his TED Talk. He's a journalist, and he talks about a bunch of different a bunch of different doctors and a bunch of different research that went into addiction. And he talks about Dr. Peter Cohen, who wonders if we should even be calling addiction anymore. Dr. Cohen believes that humans have this innate desire to bond, and when we're healthy emotionally, we'll bond with each other and we'll form communities and we'll do things together. But when life beats you down, your home life is broken, you don't have friends, you don't have a job that's fulfilling, no sense of community, people find relief through some other vice. Maybe that's binge watching TV, maybe that's someone that's an emotional eater and eats all the time and gets overweight. Maybe that's through work, maybe they're a workaholic, maybe it's a lot of exercise, maybe it's heroin, maybe it's cannabis, maybe it's liquor. But how different is someone who finds refuge through one vice different from another? And I think there was one study that I remember reading about a while back that really kind of hit home, and I was like, oh, that makes sense. Has anyone heard of the Rat Park study? Is anyone familiar with it? So they did the study actually way back in the 70s, which is amazing because then they started the war on drugs not far after this research came out. But basically what they did was, the first part of the study, they took a bunch of rats and put them in cages in isolation and gave them 2 bottles of water. One had just water in it and the other had water with morphine diluted into it, which is basically synthetic heroin. Morphine's like pure heroin in a way. It's derived from the same plant, same addictive properties. And what they found was that the rats would almost immediately go and drink the morphine water. And so okay. And so they tried the experiment again. And this time they built what they called this rat parks. They built this basically amusement park for rats that held this food and drink and toys and other rats to play around with and have sex with and just have a blast. It was this utopia for rats where they could do everything they wanted. But again, they left, they had the 2 bottles of water for them to drink from. One had morphine and one didn't. And what they found was the rats didn't hardly touch the morphine water at all. They had no interest in it. And they did the study a third time to see if maybe those rats in the first cage, are those rats now addicted and can't function, can't do anything. And so what they did was they took these rats, they put them in the isolation cage, they force fed them the morphine water for 57 days, and then put them in the rat park. And what they found out was almost all of those rats never touched the morphine water in rat park after they had been hooked on it for 57 days. They found their friends and their community and all the things they wanted and stopped using the drug. And not only that, but they found that the rats, they had some mild traits of addiction, some twitching, and kind of some oddities, but none of the mythic seizures and sweats you hear about from someone who's addicted to heroin that's going through withdrawals. So that makes you wonder how much of it is the drug itself, how much of it is the emotional trauma that comes with being a drug addict, and how much of it is just the fact that the heroin they get on the street is not generally heroin, it's not generally pure, it's usually cut with some nasty chemicals and who knows what that can make it dangerous and cause them to overdose and die unintentionally. And the same thing was shown again with Vietnam veterans after the war, was they found there was a huge heroin problem among soldiers in Vietnam. And I think it was something like 20% of the soldiers in Vietnam were addicted to heroin at one point, self-identified as heroin addicts. When they came back to the United States, there was a study that was done that showed 95% of those self-identified heroin addicts stopped using heroin when they came back in the US and never touched it again. And that's a huge number. And so just going to show, you take someone, you put them in a traumatic situation, and they can find refuge, and maybe it's a drug like heroin, and you can rehabilitate them in a society, and these people can live a fulfilling life without the need for the drug. And so that's my talk. I just think kind of as a society, I think we need to rethink addiction and how we treat addicts and people who are addicted to drugs, and maybe realize that they're not all that different from the rest of us. They just got unlucky with their choices.